This is Monica Perez, and we are reading the second half of the Darwin chapter in our book, Makers of the Modern Mind by Thomas P. Neal. This is a book that this edition, the second edition, was made in 1958. So I'm going to actually talk to friends of the show, Scott and William, about this very book in May. We're going to go over the whole thing. And I especially want to talk to them about the difference between modern and postmodern. So I feel like this book was written in the modern era, and now we're in the postmodern era. So this gets us from basically the Renaissance or Luther to the 20th century, but a lot has changed since then. However, he goes through it step by step. So at every stage in this book, there are things that are different now from when these stepping stones were taken. Some things were rejected and new things were adopted. Obviously, Darwin continues to influence the modern and postmodern mind. I would say it's more of an influence over the mind than anything really scientific, because I personally think that this random mutation, whatever, natural selection, is mathematically impossible to account for the origin of species. And that's what he says it does. I think it can account for some things, like some little minor adaptations. This is a great book. Arthur Kessler's The Case of the Midwife Toad. It's got to be some kind of limited hangout, but boy, I think it was a limited hangout in anticipation of Darwinism being totally discredited. It was written in the 1970s, and it talks about a guy, Paul Kammerer, who basically proved that Lamarck was right and Darwin was wrong back in the 20s. And I think with the dawning of epigenetics, it was clear that Darwin's method was wrong. And I feel like they had to put something out there that kind of got ahead of that narrative. Anyway, let us proceed. This is section 4 of the Darwin chapter. Okay. Significantly, oh my gosh, someone texted me this. Significantly, Thomas Neal says, Darwin's book, the full title is The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. So someone texted me this saying it definitely had a racist undertones, and I think it probably did. I never read it. Anyway, this whole volume, Darwin says in his concluding chapter, is one long argument, a point overlooked by those who consider Darwin the ideal man of science. In it, he amasses circumstantial evidence in favor of evolution, but he does not present any positive proof that the theory is true. It is a book which need not be read to be talked about. It need not even be read from cover to cover to be understood and appreciated, for the whole argument is presented in a masterful summary in the last chapter. One need only to read the first few chapters and the last, dipping occasionally into the others to see what kind of evidence Darwin adduces to support his general theories. The first 5 chapters contain the fundamentals of Darwin's theory. The next 4 discuss possible objections in his theory. Chapters 10 to 13 deal with geology, the geographic distribution of plants and animals, classification, morphology, and embryology in the light of the fundamental theories presented in the first 5 chapters. The 14th chapter is a recapitulation of the argument, where Darwin discards the boots of plodding science to put on poet's wings for a majestic, sweeping flight into the rarefied atmosphere of pure literature. Quote, it is interesting to contemplate a tangled bank, he concludes, clothed with many plants of many kinds, with birds singing on the bushes, with various insects flitting about, and with worms crawling through the damp earth. And to reflect that these elaborately constructed forms, so different from each other and dependent upon each other in so complex a manner, have all been produced by laws acting around us. These laws, taken in the largest sense, being growth with reproduction, inheritance, which is almost implied by reproduction, variability from the indirect and direct action of the conditions of life, and from use and disuse. See, that's Lamarckian. A ratio of increase so high as to lead to a struggle for life, and as a consequence to natural selection, entailing divergence of character and the extinction of less improved forms. That's where I think it doesn't work. And I've explained this before. If it requires the extinction of other forms, you have to have such an advantage every step of the way. The math doesn't work for me. Thus, from the war of nature, from famine and death, the most exalted object which we are capable of conceiving, namely the production of the higher animals, directly follows. There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers, having been originally breathed by the Creator into a few forms or into one. And whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. And you know what? That's the essence of the problem. The reason, in my opinion, I think a lot of people would agree with me, that Darwinism was promoted is that both socially and scientifically, it was a benefit to the people who had the ability to shape the trends of thought. And socially, they like social Darwinism. I guess this author continues to make the argument, which I don't know enough about it, that as what they call capitalism, which I find annoying. I mean, I can't. Capitalism to me is having some surplus and investing it in something else. Mom and pop entrepreneurship is capitalism to me. But anyway, if you want to talk about capitalism and the nasty, I don't know, absentee owner, financial capitalism stuff, they like the social Darwinism because it justified the extremes of poverty and wealth that were emerging from the ability to capture surplus and monetize it. But also scientifically, I always thought was the more important thing is that it's supposed to replace God. Like, did you ever think, like, do you believe in God? Do you not believe in God? I always land on, but where do we come from? Where we can think there's so much we don't know. Like, it's just too orderly to be just blipped into existence. This makes no sense. And I think Darwin was there for the powers that be who who were threatened by the order of Christianity, of the power that they lack over people whose only supreme, authority is God. That it's supposed to make you think that there is no God, that we just evolved. But even Darwin had to say there was a creator. What was it? This was a Greek thing, the prime mover, unmoved. There had to be something to start. And now we'll say, well, it was the Big Bang. It's like, well, what started that? Even though I think that's not even true. But anyway, back to the author, no longer quoting Darwin. The book is imposing. Its very size is enough to convince many readers. The fact that Darwin raised every possible objection, some of which he could not answer, convinces many others of his objectivity. The mass of evidence from the geological record, from domestic experiments, from geography, and from embryology bears down upon the average reader to crush his resistance as the weight of the sea crushes the life out of a man pulled to the floor of the ocean. But Darwin was right in saying that it is just one long argument. It is an argument in favor of the thesis stated by the title, an argument supported by 500 pages of detailed evidence Darwin had accumulated over the space of almost 30 years. The Origin was a powerful book because it was an abstract of a greater, more detailed work yet to come, because it seemed to be so objective, because it was science speaking, and science was infallible, was indeed divine in Darwin's day. Oh, I have to shout out Courtney Turner, who tweeted, so last time when we did the first half of this, that she was saying, and I think her friend Dr. Lee was saying, that the Beagle trip, that Darwin never even went on the Beagle. That trip didn't even exist. That may be true. I'm not convinced by the evidence anyway, so I don't care. They do say Galapagos is cool though to visit, but I'm not even interested because I don't even believe this stuff. I mean, I'm sure it is cool to visit, but okay. Darwin approaches the proof of his thesis logically, step by step, handling one point at a time. His first step is to prove that, quote, under domestication, we see much variability. He notes three principal points about variation under domestication. One, it is large in amount. Two, it is inherited. Three, it is not caused by man. Yeah, that's all true. I'll give you that. However, the fact that everything else is extinct, man does that. Man makes sure that nothing else is nurtured. They do not breed the things that they don't want, but not because those things cannot breed. All right. Step 2 is to apply these conclusions to species in the state of nature. Quote, there is no reason why the principles which have acted so efficiently under domestication should not have acted under nature. Where, he therefore concludes, variation also occurs. This brings us to the third step, struggle for existence. Quote, a struggle for existence inevitably follows from the high rate at which all organic beings tend to increase. As more individuals are produced than can possibly survive, there must be, in every case, a struggle for existence. Either one individual with another of the same species, or with the individuals of distinct species, or with the physical conditions of life. There is no exception to the rule that every organic being naturally increases at so high a rate that if not destroyed, the earth would soon be covered by the progeny of a single pair. Hmm. I mean, yes, there's competition for resources within and without species. I don't know. I'd have to think about that a little more seriously. All right. From this comes the fourth and crucial step, Darwin's distinct contribution to the theory of evolution. In the struggle for existence, some survive and some fall by the wayside. What determines which will survive and which will not? Darwin answered this question by showing how alterations in the organism occur from time to time, and how some of these alterations enable the organism to adapt itself more perfectly to its environment. These can be called favorable variations. A white rabbit, for example, will be better adapted for survival in snowy regions than his brown brother. So in time, the brown rabbits will all be exterminated by predatory animals, whereas the white rabbits will have escaped detection and will go on living and reproducing. Or some parent animal of the present giraffe had a long-necked offspring one day who was better equipped to eat top leaves from the trees. So he survived drought years when his shorter-necked brethren perished. His progeny, of course, inherited this favorable variation, and so the giraffe survived as a long-necked animal. What caused the favorable variation, the white rabbit or the long neck, was purely a matter of chance. Yeah, most mutations kill you. My son has a mutation that makes him incapable of creating, of reproducing. But the problem is, okay, so his short-necked brethren will perish. And what? He mates with someone right before they perish, and he would have to have the dominant, like that gene would have to be dominant, not only a mutation, but a dominant one. And then there would have to be some serious inbreeding unless there was another one that had the same mutation. I mean, there's a lot of mathematical long shots, and it's supposedly the single most observable operational factor in the species, and it's really long shots. Okay. Thus, the fittest survive, and the agency determining their survival is called natural selection. In later editions of The Origin, Darwin gave an increasingly large part to such other agencies as use and disuse and the direct action of environment, but he always insisted that the dominant role was played by natural selection. See, use and disuse and the direct action of the environment implies it's like a subcellular intelligence that understands that information and passes it on. I mentioned this last time. That's Lamarck, not Darwin. And that is consistent with epigenetics, but it leaves that question unanswered. What is the nature of that subcellular intelligence? Where did it come from? How does it operate? I don't think anyone's come up with a good answer to that. Okay. These variations, each one slight in itself, add up until there is sufficient change to call the altered animal or plant a new species. But every single solitary one of those little things would have to cause the brethren to become extinct. Math, too much math. Thus, the origin of species is explained. And this was all Darwin sought to explain, for he did not deal with the origin of life, as is popularly believed. Yes, and still they have not generated life from non-life, but rather with the origin and extinction of different forms of life called species. Yeah, Burning Beard says it takes so much mental gymnastics to believe in mutational change as advantage. Yes, it would be so rare. And then it would have to be dominant, and you would have to mate, and it would have to happen at every single step of the way. I mean, it's not really, try to do the math. It's really impossible. Okay, section 5. Like Newton, Darwin is a man of one book, though like Newton, he wrote many. None of his other works, except perhaps The Descent of Man, proved to be of general interest, for they were all scientific treatises on geological or biological problems, or else they were worthless speculation in fields where Darwin was incompetent to trod. He considered his origin merely the abstract of his great work, which at this time he thought of as a 3-volume opus organized on the same general plan as its abstract. It would differ only in its fuller development and in an exhaustive presentation of factual evidence supporting each theory. But each section he worked upon grew under his hand as the origin had grown from an essay to a pamphlet to a small book to a big one. And Darwin's great work, therefore, remains in the land of unwritten masterpieces. The first volume of the great work appeared in 1868 as an expansion of the first chapter of The Origin. Twice as long as The Origin. It was called The Variation of Animals and Plants Under Domestication. It failed to arouse interest, save among naturalists, for whom it was a mine of information. The theory of pangenesis running through it, however, has since been discredited as a gratuitous assumption that warped Darwin's thinking on the subject. What is pangenesis again? I mean, that would be everything generated, right? So let's just get a deaf here. Pangenesis, a now disproven theory of heredity proposed by Charles Darwin, suggested that all parts of a parent's body emitted tiny particles called gemmules that collected in reproductive cells, carrying heritable information to offspring. I didn't know. That feels a little like DNA, alleles. No. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like modern genetics with its focus on DNA and genes provides a more accurate explanation of heredity than pangenesis. But it's an idea of that it's inside the cells, subcellular stuff. I think that's not the worst thing. Darwin's, quote, other book appeared in 1871, published reluctantly by the author and called The Descent of Man. Ever since 1859, he knew the book would have to be written, for he believed that the whole case for natural selection would be ruined if an exception were made for man, as many naturalists wished to do. He had avoided the subject in The Origin because he was afraid that applying natural selection to man might prejudice his entire theory by stirring up unnecessary opposition. For some time after 1859, he looked to Lyell to present the Darwinian theory in the book he was doing on man. But when Lyell's Antiquity of Man appeared in 1863, Darwin was disappointed to find that natural selection was not given what he considered its proper place. In 1864, he pinned his hopes on Wallace, even offering him his accumulated notes on the subject. But Wallace's views eventually proved as unacceptable to Darwin as Lyell's, for Wallace wanted to put man in a class apart from the lower animals. So Darwin was driven to write the book himself. It's funny because this is, of course, where Darwin lost my mother. My parents, my father totally didn't believe in evolution. My mother's like, it doesn't matter. It's fine. But I was not an ape. It's like, okay, I got you. So my son, who's just like absorbs all the propaganda he learns in school, he has Down syndrome. So he like but he's super articulate. So he tells her, Pat, no, mom, yeah, grandma, we were monkeys. We were monkeys. I was not a monkey. We're not monkeys. All right. So they have an ongoing dispute. And then she's telling him dinosaurs are fake. And he's like, look at my book. It's full of dinosaurs. I'm like, you know what? Your book does look like fake stuff. Like, the fact that it's for children, meh. So anyway, but see, all of her thoughts like that were derived from her connection with God, Jesus, Blessed Mother, Christianity. Like, that's the stuff. She was mad at me because I thought everything was fake, but she definitely turned me on to dinosaurs being fake. I was like, come on, Mom, I've seen them. You haven't seen them. That's clay. Okay. She was right. So as Darwin worked on the descent of man, the book grew too large. So Darwin found himself postponing the section on expression of the emotions for a separate future volume. Despite the cutting, the descent of man was half again as long as the origin. In it, Darwin sought to explain, quote, how far the general conclusions arrived at in my former works were applicable to man. The sole object of this work is to consider, firstly, whether man, like every other species, is descended from some pre-existing form. Secondly, the manner of his development. And thirdly, the value of the differences between the so-called races of man. These are quotes. In this work, Darwin presented evidence purporting to show that the difference between man and beast is only one of degree, that such things as conscience and the moral instinct are the natural product of living together in society. I could see that maybe. No new ideas, either on man or on evolution, are to be found in its many pages. It is only an application of the origins theories to man's evolution from lower forms of life. It should therefore be called the ascent rather than the descent of man. That's good. The expression of the emotions came out as a lesser work, which is of little importance either for the theory of evolution or for an analysis of man. Darwin continued to write on various other subjects, his books all appearing as long, forbidding tomes, but none of them caused the stir that the origin had. Darwin gradually gave up the idea of doing his great work. In 1872, he wrote to Wallace that he had taken up old botanical work and given up all theories. He continued to interest himself in evolution and natural selection till the end of his life, but he was certain by 1872 that his theories were firmly established and he was safe to putter around in his garden and entertain famous visitors. The great work was never written, so by default, its abstract, The Origin, remains Darwin's great book. Section 6. I can't get this off my mind, so I'm going to make a note. If you go, I believe it's the National Natural History Museum website, it says that even the bones, so that the dinosaurs you see definitely are clay, but even what they have in the back room that they call bones aren't made of bone. They're made of stone, or it's like they're petrified or whatever, like the granite just seeped into it from the surrounding rock and they carve the bone out of the rock. And I'm like, the rock that's made of the same thing that your not bone is made out of, you're carving a bone out of that. They're going to take that down because I've been making fun of it for so long, and that kind of thing happens. I've got to pull that quote from the I think it's the Natural History Museum. And I have a whole on MonicaPerezShow.com. I have a bunch of show notes of all the reasons, like all the kind of like the dinosaur thing is crazy. And it's great because you're kind of convinced by the end of it. And Burning Beard is saying, like, is there any talk about racism in the descent of man? And it doesn't. I'm not seeing any further discussion of the descent of man here. We're moving on to section 6. And this guy, Thomas Neal, doesn't really shy away from that. I had to bleep some stuff that I read directly out of his book. I was like, you should really respect the original text. But then I was like, oh my gosh, YouTube's totally going to take this down. All right, section 6. Darwin's fame and his standing as a maker of the modern mind therefore rest upon the origin alone. When one speaks of Darwin, he refers to the author of the origin. When one discusses Darwinism, he talks of those theories which are either found in his masterpiece or the ideas that derive almost inevitably from it. Darwin had written a book that was more important than its contents, for behind it was the force of ideas generating throughout the earlier half of the century. The accumulated force of these ideas, each of which had remained more or less isolated before, was concentrated for the first time in a single work. The origin was consequently an explosive thing in its power. Huxley observed, without exaggeration, that, quote, it is doubtful if any single book, except perhaps the Principia, ever worked so great and so rapid a revolution in science or made so deep an impression on the general mind. So Darwin found himself suddenly famous. Bunbury noted in March of 1860 that Darwin's book has made a greater sensation than any strictly scientific book that I remember. It is wonderful how much it is talked about by unscientific people. Natural selection was the topic of conversation at every informal gathering during the British Association's convention in 1860. Murray was surprised to find that he had a bestseller on his hands, and he was hurried into one printing after another. When the 6th and final revision in English appeared in 1872, 5 German editions had been published, 4 French, 3 Russian, 3 American, besides early pirated editions, and at least 1 each in Dutch, Italian, and Swedish. You got to wonder if it was also promoted, if somebody was behind that, not just a pull, but a push. Darwin became the center around which a man-made tempest raged. He was a hero or a villain, a martyr for science or a vilifier of the human race, depending on one's stand on the subject of evolution. He was seldom looked upon simply as a scientist whose work deserved serious examination, the acceptance or rejection of which should rest upon the scientific validity of the theories it contained. Instead, one accepted or rejected Darwin because of one's previous convictions, not because of the evidence he presented in the origin, and Darwin's defenders were every bit as absurd and naive as were his attackers. Huxley is typical of these younger materialists who found Darwin justifying their beliefs and their prejudices. He therefore promised to sharpen up his claws and beak for the coming fray, and from his pen poured forth such statements as this: the publication of The Origin of Species marks the hegira of science from the idolatries of special creation to the pure faith of evolution. Huxley did the review in the London Times, wrote essays on the origin in Macmillan's Magazine and Westminster Review, lectured at the Royal Institute on the new ideas, and Darwin was famous throughout England. Huxley summed up Darwin's role in the, quote, great monkey battle thus: he found a great truth trodden underfoot, reviled by bigots, and ridiculed by all the world. He lived long enough. I wonder who the bigots really were. He lived long enough to see it, chiefly by his own efforts, irrefragably established in science, inseparably incorporated with the common thoughts of men, and only hated and feared by those who would revile but dare not. Irrefragably. That's a good one. irrefragably. It is difficult to gather more inaccuracies into one complex sentence than Huxley had done in the above statement. There was no simple lineup of honest scientists against bigots, as Huxley maintains. There were bigots on both sides, and there were more capable, honest scientists opposed to Darwin's views than there were in favor of them. As a matter of fact, only a minority of naturalists, the younger generation to whom Darwin appealed, accepted the origin's central thesis. Scientifically, The problem was how large a role natural selection was to play in causing variations. Many scientists were willing to allow it an important role. Yes, me too. But they insisted that so obviously lay people as well, but they insisted that other factors played some part in the evolution of species. Some insisted that use and disuse had been neglected, as Darwin's emendations and later editions tacitly admitted. Others, like the American Asa Gray, wanted to substitute a supernatural selection for Darwin's rather inadequate natural selection. That would take the place of the breeder. Still others, like Lyell, were willing to admit natural selection's dominant role in causing the origin of new animal species, but they refused to merge man into the evolutionary process, a point on which Darwin remained adamant till his death. Others, like Mivart in the Tablet, considered Darwin's explanation satisfactory if one would admit a special act of creation by God for man. There were still others who were willing to concede almost everything Darwin had said, as long as it was not assumed that his theory was not only true, but was also the whole truth. Carlyle summed up this view by remarking caustically, quote, that the weak and incompetent pass away while the strong and adequate prevail and continue appears true enough in animal and human history. But there are mysteries in human life and in the universe not explained by that discovery. Darwin's former professor, Adam Sedgwick, saw the crux of the problem when he accused Darwin of absolute materialism and of falling before the temptation of becoming philosopher and theologian as well as scientist, of jumping unscientifically at conclusions unwarranted by empirically ascertained evidence. This almost feels like the opposite of Newton, where Newton said, I don't have any theories. I just want to observe. And Darwin's like, I'm going to go find things that prove my theory, and did not. We all admit development as a fact of history, he wrote to Darwin. But how came it about? Here in language and still more in logic, we are point blank at issue. There is a moral or metaphysical part of nature as well as a physical. A man who denies this is deep in the mire of folly. 'Tis the crown and glory of organic science that it does, through final cause, link material and moral, and yet does not allow us to mingle them in our first conception of laws and our classification of such laws, whether we consider one side of nature or the other. You have ignored this link. And if I do not mistake your meaning, you have done your best in one or two pregnant cases to break it. Were it possible, which thank God it is not, to break it, humanity, in my mind, would suffer a damage that might brutalize it and sink the human race into a lower grade of degradation than any into which it has fallen since its written records tell us of its history. Sedgwick was a grimly accurate prophet, as 2 world wars have testified, but Darwin could not understand what his professor was saying. I'm going to go back and see. I'm not sure I understood completely. There is a moral or metaphysical part of nature as well as a physical one. And organic science links the material and the moral. Okay. And denying this link is going to mess us up. All right. Well, I guess saying that Darwin ignores morality, that morality did not arrive from evolution. Although it did say that Darwin said that it could emerge from society. And I'm not totally against that idea. I've always said that whether the moral law bubbles up from nature or is pushed down from God, it is true. It is true. And you must recognize it. Or yeah, I guess you get war. John Stuart Mill, as objective a seeker after truth as England ever knew, summed up the origin's rightful place in the history of ideas by his comment that although Darwin could not, quote, be said to have proved the truth of his doctrine, He does seem to have proved that it may be true, which I take to be as great a triumph as knowledge and ingenuity could possibly achieve on such a question. That seems to be the status of the question today. No progress has been made by naturalists since Darwin's day in discovering the mechanism whereby evolution works. That's what I say. He says it's just that natural random mutation. No way. The evidence in favor of natural selection remains negative rather than positive. It still may be true, as Mill observed, but it has not been proved to be true, despite Huxley's naive assertions to the contrary. Later biologists have illuminated the problem, but at the same time, they have complicated it. There is no aspect of evolution which is not honestly held in question by contemporary biologists, from natural selection and sexual selection to the causes of variations. Good point. The inheritance of acquired characteristics and the influence of environment. It was popularly believed that Darwin had set out to prove evolution. Many reviews of The Origin either condemned it or applauded it in that light. And most scientific popularizers, like Huxley, talked about it and fought for it because of its support of the evolutionary theory, support which they changed from circumstantial to direct in the course of their popularization. When Darwin went to Cambridge to receive an honorary degree in 1877, for example, the undergraduates cheered him. Jeered an unpopular proctor, dangled a monkey, supposedly the missing link, on a string and cried, "Monkey, monkey." Thus, from the beginning, Darwin's name was associated with the theory of evolution. Those who supported the theory believed that Darwin had given it its biological, scientific credentials. Those who opposed it saw that he was the man to be refuted or discredited. Darwin had said that through the process of natural selection, the fittest survive. But within a short time, he was popularly understood to hold that the best survive, which was in perfect accord with the faith these people put in progress. You know what's funny is that, and I think Burning Beard is agreeing with me in a way, these are progressives, right? That progress is this is the thing that led to eugenics. And yet today, the prejudice is that the opposite is true. But I would say the people today who were like the mask Nazis or the vax Nazis were like Nazis. Anyway, whatever that means. There was some basis in Darwin's writing for this piece of intellectual sleight of hand, for he believed deep in his heart that, by and large, the fittest were the best, that evolution was synonymous with progress. In his notebook for 1837, he had observed, "From death, famine, rapine, and the concealed war of nature, we can see that the highest good, which we can conceive, the creation of the highest animals, has directly come." The same idea is expressed in almost the same words in the poetic last paragraph of The Origin. Darwin had said fittest, but he confused fittest with best in his own mind, and occasionally the confusion showed up in his writings. Natural selection was therefore justifiably taken as the mechanism whereby this progress, capital P, so evident to even the casual observer of the 19th century, actually took place. In the 18th century, men thought that by intelligent effort they could achieve progress. Darwin made it evident to the 19th century that progress operated by mechanical laws over which men had no control, that it would continue independently of man through the operation of natural selection. It was comforting to think that the human race was driving inevitably to perfection, that the weaker, more corrupt members fell by the wayside, that the struggle for existence was a great screening process whereby the best specimens, physically and morally, were sifted by natural selection and allowed to propagate their kind. All this was done mechanically by self-sufficient laws of nature. A cosmic purpose had replaced a divine purpose. And as Darwin's wife commented ruefully on her husband's work, it put God further off. That is why The Origin must be included among the world's important books, even though contingent circumstances rather than its own merit made it of such great consequence. West sums up its impact on the Western mind thus, quote, the effect was truly tremendous. Almost by the mere statement of a new principle of approach, dynamic, not static, he revolutionized every department of study, from astronomy to history, from paleontology to psychology, from embryology to religion. Darwin seemed to redeem the 19th century from a chaos out of which earlier static thought could bring no order. He apparently explained the mystery of life and the process of progress. His was the master idea of the century. This master idea appealed to all kinds of people. It used the concepts of matter and motion to explain life itself. In evolution, it offered a method for tracing the origin of all things, and people thought that exhaustively tracing something to its origin completely explained it. It offered a pragmatic test of value, survival, which could be applied to insects or to human institutions. It made the highly competitive economic system of the time a natural thing, following the eternal law of struggle for existence and survival of the fittest. It explained the miracle of progress, and it promised untold progress in the future. It was an unconscious rationalization and justification by a respectable scientist of the temper of his age. Fighting was the order of the day in business, in diplomacy, in war. And Darwin had explained scientifically how from struggle the highest good emerges, how from struggle and through the survival of the fittest, lowly animals, majestic man had originated. This was music to the 19th century ear, the right tune played in the right key. Section 7. So the age snatched up Darwin's master idea and applied it to all fields of thought. It was used to give scientific credentials to what the age had been doing even before Darwin wrote his book. But there can be no doubt that Darwinism not only justified but also promoted these trends. The master idea that was applied so widely was a three-sided idea consisting of struggle for existence in which the fittest survive through the process of natural selection. This was taken to mean that morality was outmoded, that approval was given to any devices whereby a man or a class or a nation could overcome its enemies in the struggle for existence. A Manchester journalist observed, as soon as The Origin appeared, that, quote, might is right, and therefore Napoleon is right, and every cheating tradesman is also right. This popular application of Darwin's three-sided master idea was not always fair to Darwin, but it is true that he fathered the idea and could not logically deny his paternity of the popularized offspring that came to be known as social Darwinism. In the last chapter of The Origin, he suggested that his theories be applied to such subjects as geology and psychology, that by its application to social studies, quote, much light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history. The idea of struggle being a natural and a good thing permeated the book. Darwin approved of this struggle because of the beneficent results which came from it. It was for this reason, and not for any moral scruples, that he refused to contribute to the defense of Bradlaugh for circulating a book on birth control. He refused to contribute to the defense of Bradlaugh for circulating a book on birth control. So he wanted overpopulation to weed out, I guess. He wrote in answer to the request for money that he disagreed with preventing checks to population on the ground that overmultiplication was useful, since it caused a struggle for existence in which only the strongest and ablest survive. The report from Iron Mountain makes the point that treating children for cancer keeps cancer in the gene pool. Little cold. And the fittest, those who win the wars or make the most money, are hailed as the best. See how that turns out. In the closing pages of The Origin, Darwin observed, maybe that's why the good guys always win. Isn't that what Norman Donald said? He had a history book. It's like, it says here right in this book, the good guys always win. Always won. As natural selection works solely, this is a Darwin quote, by and for the good of each being, All corporeal and mental endowments will tend to progress towards perfection. It is for this reason that West concludes popular Darwinism may be a crude, but it is scarcely an unfair or inaccurate presentation of the broad effect of Darwin's basic writings. Darwinism was used then to explain everything from language to war. Bishop Trench, an English language authority, showed how the fittest words survive and the less fit become obsolete. Sir Henry Maine, an authority on government, wrote of the beneficent private war, which makes one man strive to climb on the shoulders of another and remain there through the law of the survival of fittest. Darwinism was used to justify competition with no holds barred as a natural struggle for existence among business firms. I mean, personally, I think that what you see as like antitrust, whatever, if you didn't have copyrights and patents, you really wouldn't have that. You would have a, I don't know. I think that you would have a race to the bottom profitability wise, that it's natural monopolies basically don't even exist. Okay. So I don't mind unbridled competition in business, but I mean, I'm open-minded to counter argument. The fittest survived and the world progressed as weak or honest firms went bankrupt. Weak or honest firms went bankrupt. Oh, no, you have to have laws against fraud. No, you can't. Yeah, no. You have to have normal, like, don't steal and don't kill laws. I mean, they're not advocating for no laws, so this doesn't make sense. Okay. So it was with human beings. Eugenicists like Sir Francis Galton were convinced Darwinists who consciously applied his theories to society to conclude that since men are not equal and since inequalities are inherited, social misfits should be allowed to perish and should be prevented from breeding additional inferior stock. Herbert Spencer invoked Darwin to show how, quote, under the natural order of things, society is constantly excreting its unhealthy, imbecile, slow, vacillating, faithless members. I mean, or you could read the parable of the talents. I don't know. I feel like everybody has a place. The idea was applied to social groups by such men as Walter Bagot and Ludwig Gumplowitz. And the path led straight from them to the ideologies of fascism and Nazism. Bagot's famous work, Physics and Politics, should have been called Biology and Politics, as is indicated by its subtitle, Thoughts on the Application of the Principles of Natural Selection and Inheritance to Political Society. In this work, Bagot taught that social progress took place only because the struggle for existence caused men to form strong, compact social groups having despotic control over the entire conduct of their members. History is the record of the struggle between groups and in time between national groups. Those groups which are most tightly organized, most compact and homogeneous are victorious. So Bagot concludes, quote, what you want is a comprehensive rule binding men together, making them do much the same things, fashioning them alike and keeping them so, like as in fascism, like a bundle of sticks. Others picked up the Darwinian idea of struggle for existence and survival of the fittest to apply it to races. Here you go. Sweet Cheeks, I want to answer your comment. It's the laws against fraud that makes people think fraud. Oh my gosh. Yes. This is what I think about truth in advertising. Advertising wouldn't exist if you didn't have truth in advertising laws because nobody would ever believe anything. I totally agree. It is there to protect the advertisers. The fraudsters. But I mean, you do want to have recourse if somebody commits fraud against you, completely deceives you, shows you one thing, you give them the money and they swap it out for something else. I mean, it's really cheating and stealing. But I hear what you're saying. But yeah, I was thinking Burning Beard's going to want to hear this one. Others picked up the Darwinian idea of struggle for existence and survival of the fittest to apply it to races. Although I don't think they get into what he actually said. Okay, thus Alfred Rosenberg follows the Darwin line in writing that history is the dramatic battle of distinct races, that survival is the only test of value between races, that the struggle is inevitable and perpetual. In the same way, Darwin's idea was used to justify war as a form of struggle between nations from which good is bound to come. Darwin himself believed that a short war benefits the world because it brings out good social qualities without killing off too many fit men. No, see, that was also in Report from Iron Mountain. They did not like war because it killed the fit men. They wanted something to substitute for war that would kill weak people, old people, and they said they figured it out but wouldn't share the answer. And they mentioned environmentalism, terrorism. I think they mentioned terrorism, but of course it's disease. The Franco-Prussian War of 1870 was translated in Darwinian terms everywhere. Bagot approved of war because the hard impact of military virtues beats meanness out of the world. And Spencer insisted that, quote, without war, the world would still have been inhabited only by men of feeble types sheltering in caves and living on wild food. I think people are literally longing for that right now. Struggle for survival was extended by Marx from the individual. Hey, wait, can somebody please, Burning Beard, would you please look up how do you pronounce Bagot? It's Baghot. It's actually a column in The Economist magazine. So I wonder, or maybe Financial Times. It's kind of weird because he sounds like not a great guy. But a lot of times the English won't pronounce French things in a French way because they were mad at them for so long. So maybe they pronounce the T like claret. Like Englishmen will call claret. Anyway, struggle for survival is extended by Marx from the individual where Spencer would have liked to keep it to classes. Marx wrote of social evolution through class struggle, just as Darwin had written of natural evolution through struggle among individuals. Marx used that objective material thing called the forces of production in the same way that Darwin had used natural selection. Whether he fully realized it or not, Darwin had sanctified struggle as history's great selector and purifier, which promised untold blessings in the future. Everyone picked up the master idea as a directive toward his own utopia. Marx planned a utopia that Darwin could never enjoy, but the English biologist had nonetheless furnished Marx with a roadmap which England's adopted son thought pointed the way to the utopian classless society. So, guess who the next subject is? It is, of course, Marx. The robot dirties his hands. That's the subtitle of the Marx chapter. I'm going to look up how to pronounce Bagot. Baghot. Let's see. Bagot, the correct pronunciation of Bagot, the name, of the column in The Economist is Badgit with a short sound like in cat. Badgit. Unbelievable. I knew it. Here, let's listen to it. Are you kidding me? Shush. There you go.
Here was a journalist named Walter Bagehot.
Bagehot. Oh my gosh, it's Ben Bernanke. I can't stand him. That was Ben Bernanke telling us how to pronounce Bagehot. I knew I was saying it wrong. Rewind that and edit that out. Bagehot. There's not even a D in it. All right. There you have it. Until next time, when we talk about Marx, this is Monica Perez. Thank you very much for listening. That was pretty fun. We will see you next time.